Hi, we've been talking about judges in our lessons lately. And so today we're going to talk about Gideon. He's the next one we're going to talk about. Now, after Deborah died, the lady from the last lesson, it wasn't long before the Israelites started to worship idols again. So as you know, through that cycle of disobedience, the Lord had to bring punishment on the Israelites because of their worship of idols. So this time, it was the Midianites. Now, the Midianites were a huge tribe of people that didn't necessarily live in one place. They traveled around, they had camels and tents, and they would go and find food, generally other people's food. So the Israelites would work hard. They would save their seed from the year before. When it was time to plant, they would go out, they would till the land, they would plant all the seeds, they would water it, they would take care of it. And then when it was harvest time, the Midianites would come and they would take all the food. They would eat all the food. And if there was any there that they couldn't eat, then they would burn it so the Israelites couldn't have it. They also took anything else they wanted, anything at all. If there was houses or cows or goats or chickens, they would just take them. Whatever they wanted, they took. The Israelites were so afraid of the Midianites, they actually left their houses and all their stuff and went to live in caves. Many of them went to live in caves in the mountains and the hills to hide from the Midianites. Well, there was one young man named Gideon who was a tall, strong young man, and he had many brothers, but we don't know about them. We only know that one day he was in the bottom of a kind of like a hole or a pit, most likely. It's called a wine press, where they would have taken all the grapes. If they had a harvest of grapes, they would throw all the grapes in there, and then they would stomp on them, squish the grapes, get all the juice out, and then they would have lots of grape juice. But in this case, there was no grapes. He was hiding in there so that he could thresh the wheat that he had harvested. He had managed to plant and harvest some wheat, and he was threshing it in there, cleaning it, getting it ready to take home and eat it, in the hopes that the Midianites would not see him. And while he was in there, he saw something. He saw a stranger. Now, in our picture, it's a little wrong. We have some wings on this stranger. Imagine they are not there. When Gideon looked up, he saw someone he did not know. And so the man started speaking with Gideon. It was actually an angel of the Lord, but Gideon did not know that, so therefore he didn't see the wings and such. Okay, so this stranger said to Gideon, "The Lord is with you. You are strong and brave. He has chosen you." And Gideon said, "Oh, if the Lord if the Lord is with us, then how come we don't see him working? I have heard stories. I have heard how God rescued the Israelites from the Egyptians. I have heard of the miracles that he did in the past. Why can't we see them now? If God is with us, then how come we can't see him working? Have you seen how the Midianites have taken everything? There's no hope left." Well, the angel of the Lord said, "Don't worry, I will make you strong. God can save Israel from the Midianites, and God is sending you, Gideon." And Gideon said, "Me? My family is not an important family. We are not rich and famous. And in my family, with all my brothers, I am the least of everyone in my family." And the angel of the Lord said, "The Lord will be with you, and you will quickly destroy the Midianite hordes that invade the land." Well, Gideon wanted to be kind and hospitable to this stranger. And so he said, well, you wait here, I'll go get some food. Now, remember, there was not much food in Israel at the time because the Midianites were taking all the food. But Gideon knew where he could get some, so he went and he got some meat and made a broth with it and some cakes or like flatbread kind of stuff probably, and brought this food back to offer it to the stranger. And the stranger said, put it on that rock over there. So that's where Gideon put all the food. And all of a sudden, the food went up in fire and smoke. It caught on fire. And then the stranger disappeared. And that's when Gideon knew for sure that he was speaking with an angel. And then he was really frightened. He thought, oh no, I have seen the Lord. Now I will die. But then God spoke to him. He heard the voice of God, and God said, you will not die. Don't worry. Everything will be fine. So Gideon built an altar there where the stone was to honor God, and he called it the Lord is Peace. And that night, God spoke to Gideon again. So God told Gideon something he wanted him to do. The very first job he had for Gideon was, he said, listen, your father has an altar to Baal. I want you to go and break it down, and I want you to use the wood from the idol, and I want you to build an altar to me. I want you to sacrifice an ox on the new altar, and I want you to use the wood from the idol to burn the sacrifice to me. Well, Gideon knew that the people in his area would be extremely angry with him if he did this. And so he was afraid. He waited until it was nighttime. Then he took 10 servants of his father's, and they went out, and he did what God asked him to do. He broke down the idol. He made a new altar to God. He sacrificed an ox on the altar to the Lord. And the next day, when the sun came up, the men who lived in their area looked over there where the altar was. It was gone. They were so angry. And just like in many small towns, somebody knew what had happened. Probably one of these servants had shared his information with others. And people were saying, who has done this horrible thing to our idol, to our God? And someone said, oh, that was Gideon, the son of Joash. And so they went to Joash's house. They were all angry, a whole group of men. They were so angry, and they went to Joash's house, and they banged on the door, and they said, bring out your son, bring out your son. He must die for what he has done to the idol. And Joash came to the door. He wasn't too upset about any of it. And he was like, well, I thought that was a god. Does Baal need you to help him out? If Baal is a god, shouldn't he fight his own battles? Shouldn't he have revenge on my son if my son has hurt him in some way? Why does he need you to help him out? If he's a god, he can do his own revenge. Well, that made the townspeople kind of embarrassed. They were like, oh yeah, right, that's logical. And they went away, and they didn't bother them anymore. Well, after that, Gideon was still kind of frightened. The Midianites were coming to town. And even though he had seen the angel, even though he had heard the voice of God, he was still not sure, like, me? Are you sure it's me that's supposed to do this? And so he asked God if he would give him a sign for sure, to let him know for sure that he was the one who was going to lead the army against the Midianites and help them to escape them. And so he asked God if he could put a fleece during the night. You know how in the summertime especially, you wake up in the morning, you go out in the grass, and the grass is all wet and dewy. Well, he asked God if he really was going to lead the Israelites against the Midianites. He asked God if he would make the fleece all wet and dewy overnight and the ground all around it dry. So he went to bed, he woke up, he went out. I'm sure he rushed out first thing and he grabbed that fleece and he squeezed it, and a whole bunch of water came out, so much it filled a whole bowl, and the ground around was dry. But you know how our brains can deceive us. He thought, what if that was a coincidence? What if that would have happened anyway? So he prayed again, and he said, oh Lord, please don't be angry with me. I have one more request. If I'm supposed to lead the Israelites against the Midianites, will you please give me one more sign? Tonight, I'll put the fleece out again, and overnight, will you please make the fleece dry and the ground all wet? So he went to bed. I doubt if he had much sleep that night. He woke up first thing in the morning. He must have ran out and grabbed that fleece. It was dry as bone, and the ground all around was wet. Well, there was no question of a coincidence there. That couldn't possibly have happened like that twice. And so he knew for sure that God had chosen him and the Israelites would have the victory over the Midianites. Well, the Midianites had come to town, so to speak. They were in a valley nearby, and there was so many, they looked like grasshoppers covering the ground, and they had countless camels, so many that they couldn't even begin to count them. There was tents, there was people, there was camels, and they were ready for war. And so Gideon blew a trumpet to call the men to battle, and 32,000 Israelites showed up. Well, there was 135,000 Midianites. So needless to say, those aren't really great odds for a battle. However, God looked down and he spoke to Gideon and he said, you have too many men, Gideon. If I let that many men go into battle, they're going to think they're awesome. They're going to think they did it themselves. And aren't they amazing? No, you have too many. I want them to know that I did this. So Gideon called the men together and he said, listen, if any of you are afraid, it's okay. We will not look down on you. You feel free to go home. Well, 22,000 men went home. So Gideon was left with 10,000 men. But God looked down and he said, you know what? That's still too many. They will think that they're extra awesome if I let that many men go into war. So we need less. He said, this is what you're going to do. Go take all the men down for a drink at the river before they go to battle. Make sure they are well hydrated. Take them down to the river and watch how they drink. And if they, like this man here, if they put their hand up to their mouth and drink, then select them to go into battle. Anyone that drinks by putting their face down into the water or something, no. They can go home. I just want the ones that drink with their hand to their mouth. And so Gideon did what God said, and he separated the men who cupped their hand to their mouth, and there was 300 men. And God said, that's just right. Well, that night, God spoke to Gideon again. He said, I want you to go down to the camp of the Midianites. I want you to sneak down there like a spy, and I want you to listen. There's something I want you to hear down there. And if you are afraid, take your servant with you. I really like the fact that God recognized that Gideon would probably be afraid, and that was okay. And he had a plan for if he was afraid. Well, Gideon was afraid, and so he asked his servant to go with him, and the two of them together snuck down in the night to the camp of the Midianites. This isn't a very good picture because it doesn't show the way the Bible describes it. The tents would have just been filling the valley, not just a few scattered ones there. Anyways, they went down and they snuck down and they listened at a tent, and they heard two men talking. And one man said, I just had the craziest dream. I dreamt there was a loaf of bread and it fell on my tent, and the tent completely fell down. I don't understand. And it bothers me somehow. I feel like this is a significant dream. And the man that was with him said, oh, there is only one possible explanation for that dream. It is Gideon. Gideon is going to win in the battle against the Midianites. That's the only possible explanation. Well, that put courage in the heart of Gideon. And so God wanted him to hear that so that he could just have that extra boost of courage. So he and his servant went back up to the men feeling like, yes, God is with us. We will have the victory. And so he had a plan, and he gave each of the 300 men a pitcher, like a bowl thing, and a lamp, and a trumpet. And he divided them up, so they went around the valley at the top of the hills around the valley. And he said, when I give the signal, I want you all to blow your trumpet and break your jar and show the light from the lamp all at once. And then yell as loud as you can, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And so everybody went and they snuck around the hills of the valley where the Midianites were. And they waited and waited in the darkness for the sign from Gideon. And when Gideon gave the sign at the beginning of the second watch in the middle of the night, they all did exactly what they were supposed to do. They blew their trumpet, they broke the pitcher, they shone the lamp, and they yelled with all their might, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Well, God had a great victory at that moment. All the Midianites that were sleeping in their tents woke up dazed and confused. They were already afraid because of the rumors they had heard of this mighty man of Gideon. And they jumped out of bed and started fighting with each other in the middle of the night in their confusion. And they were killing each other. Gideon wasn't even there. And then they started running away. They left their tents, they left their camels, they started just running away. And that's when Gideon and his men grabbed their swords and pursued them. Other Israelites came out to help them, and they pursued the Midianites, and God gave them a great victory that day over the Midianites. Well, unfortunately, the cycle kept continuing. After the life of Gideon, as soon as Gideon died, after 40 years of peace, as soon as he died, the Bible says the Israelites went back to worship Baal. It did not take them long to continue in their cycle of disobedience. Well, next week we will hear about another judge, Samson, and that will be the end of our section on Judges. So have a good week. Thank you.